Mm. I love the reporter's notebooks out.
My name is Hannah. I'm a reporter for Opinion. We have a goal for this interview. For doing background research, we know that both of you would have good profiles. However, since this is a journalism class, the goal of the interview would be to better understand the writing process from a professional's point of view.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Trent. I'm a reporter for The Opinion.
Okay.
We have been studying about background research. What background research did you do before coming to Hawaii?
It's a great question. You really want to show up to any interview with as much knowledge as you can have about not just the subject, but any related things. So if you're doing a story about a football team, you want to really know what you're talking about when it comes to football to the best of your ability. And you want to know about the place where you're going too. So good. Yeah, let's get this right and close. So you want to know as much about the subject and anything that you think can contribute to the story. So if we want this to be a story about not just the football team, but also about Hawaiian culture, then I would want to read some books about that, some articles about that, try to get a deeper understanding. If I didn't know much about football to start, I'd want to learn about football. There's tons of different ways that you can do that. YouTube series, videos, documentaries, all that kind of stuff. So before I ever leave to do a story, I do a lot of research. Most of it for me involves reading. I like to see what prior reporting has been about, because most of the people that I write about have been written about at least once before. You know, like if I go and write a story about Stephen Curry, it's not the first time Stephen Curry has been written about, so I want to make sure that I'm giving somebody something new, because that is what news is, right? Like, why would they want to read something when they can already know all of that stuff about Steph? They want to read something new. They want to learn something more about him, so that's what we're trying to give them. So research helps you not only prepare yourself and ask good questions, but it also helps you to prevent yourself from repeating yourself or repeating previous stories, because you don't want to do that. You want to give somebody something new. That's why they're reading you.
Do you want to pause so you guys can write some stuff down?
Yeah, scribble.
Yeah. Where's your reporter's notebook? You need it. I said that before.
Those pieces of paper are no good because you need the notebook because, can I borrow this real quick? You got it? I'm going to give it right back. Don't worry. I'm not going to steal it. When you're writing, when you're following someone, which is most of what you want to do, because you want action. You don't just want to sit and talk to someone. You want to see what they do, because quotes don't move a story, action moves a story. You have to move with the characters, right? What people want is the completion of an action. So if you see like action movies, you know, what they do when they have to explain something boring, there'll be a scientist and he'll have a little coffee cup on the table and he'll go, "We need to give the aliens a cold." And he'll lift up the coffee cup like this, and then he'll explain the really boring part that they have to get out of the way for the movie to make sense. And then he'll take a sip of the coffee. And the reason they put it right there is because people want to see the action completed. It's psychological. You need to see it. And so a lot of stories are built around action, and the tension is the suspension of that action, and then you complete it throughout the end. So if you have your notebook, then you're writing while the person is moving. But if you only have a loose piece of paper, then you're not going to be able to do that. It's very hard to write on a loose. I was asked, you should just in general, during an interview, if this is not the question you asked, but during an interview, if you don't understand what the person is saying, or if you can't keep up with what they're saying, you should let them know politely, right? Because you want to understand. If you don't understand, then how are you going to write it to where your readers can understand? If you don't know what they're saying, then how are your readers going to know what they're saying? You can't assume that your readers understand something that you don't, right? So if you don't understand what I'm saying, or any of your story subjects are saying, then you need to ask them, what does that mean? What did you mean when you said that? Those follow-up questions are critical. You can't just move down a list. You have to really know what it is that they're saying, what they're talking about. Because if that doesn't come across in your story, then you're doing a disservice to the people who are reading it, right? All right, so he asked me, how do I get through background research? Because sometimes it's boring. Sometimes, that's totally right. Sometimes it is really boring. That's okay. What you want, if something is boring, that's great. If all the things that have ever been written about this subject are boring, that is a terrific opportunity for you to write something really exciting. If everything has ever been done in a lame way, you can do it in a really cool way. And that's an opportunity for you to do something better than has been done before. Also, I'm of the opinion that no people are boring. If you spend enough time getting to know them and really understanding what makes them work, then people are all very interesting. It's very interesting what motivates people to move about their worlds.
Alright, so we've been doing story ideas.
Wait, what's your name?
Oh, my name is Ryan Van Arsdale.
Okay.
I'm a reporter for The Opinion.
Okay.
We've been doing story ideas, practicing pitch sessions. Now, I want to know, how did you find out about Alex, and how did you decide that her story was appropriate for your website?
Love the enthusiasm in your question. Very engaging. Loved it. I found Alex's story through a highlight online. I just saw the first touchdown pass that she threw, and I don't think that it is hard to know that there are not a lot of starting varsity female high school quarterbacks in the country. There were two that actually I was looking at the time. Another one is this woman in Florida, in South Florida, who plays quarterback as well. And so I thought that was interesting, and I'm always looking for stories that are unique and for people who are overcoming obstacles, and overcoming obstacles includes doing something that people don't do a lot, right? That is the definition of news. If something doesn't happen and then it does, that's news. It happened, right? And the more unusual it is, the better it is. So I thought that her story would be good because we have a very male-dominated sport in high school football, and the most prominent position in high school football, or in any level of football, is the quarterback. So for a woman not just to play football, which is a male-dominated sport, but to play the main position in the male-dominated sport is inherently interesting. If I don't answer your question, follow up, all right?
My name is Clyde Ivan Morales. I'm a opinion reporter.
Okay.
You've studied leads. What are you thinking about for your lead on Alex?
Well, I'm not writing a story on Alex, so I haven't thought about a lead because it's just we're doing the documentary, but that's fine. I'm a print reporter, so that's a perfectly reasonable question to ask. Why don't I tell you about, in general, what I think about for leads?
Yeah.
Is that all right? In general, a lead should be either the most interesting thing that you have discovered in your reporting or the second most interesting thing. And I'm going to turn this question back on you. If it's the second most interesting thing in a story, where should the first most interesting thing be? At the end, exactly. If your story is really long, I write a lot of really long stories, right? My last story that I published before I came here was 7,000 words, okay? If somebody's going to get through a 7,000 word story, there better be something really interesting at the end of that story. Otherwise, it's going to be terrible. You need a payoff. A kicker is what it's called. There's the lead and then there's the kicker. So, when you're thinking about the lead, you either want to get the most important or most interesting facts that you have at the top, or you want it to be an introduction into the arc of the story, and you want to set up, like we were talking about earlier, the character in action, in motion, somebody just walking through the school, taking a snap in a football game. You want that motion to start the story because you want to give the readers a vivid picture of what's happening. When you're doing a print story, you want to create a mental image for the reader, and so you do that with vivid language, vivid descriptions, lots of details. That's the best way to do that. So you would want to start with a description of what the crowd was like at the game, the band playing a song. If you can name the song, it's even better, because what comes to your mind if I say the band was playing a song? Nothing. It's kind of boring, right? But what if I say the band was playing Bruno Mars? What's one of Bruno Mars' songs? What is it? 24 Karat Magic, right? If I say the band is playing 24 Karat Magic, now what happens? What do you think? Do you think about the song playing?
I think about how bad it would sound if it was played on band.
Right, but see how your mind is turning, right? The band was playing a song, doesn't offer you much, but the band is playing a specific song, gives you a specific image, and it gives you this mental idea of what is happening. So every time you can be more detailed, it gives the reader more immersion into the story. That's what you want. You want them to be involved in the story.
My name is Shanti. I'm a reporter for the opinion stuff. Who did you interview, and how did you decide that they would be good sources for this story?
So for this story, we talked to 5 players on the football team, not including Alexandria. So Alexandria, of course, because she's the main subject of the story. And then 5 other players from the football team. And then 2 of the coaches on the football team. And then Alexandria's father. And her brother. She has a little brother.
Isaac Buchanan. He's on the JV team.
There you go. So,
Yeah.
the reason why I chose those people was because Alexandria, we interviewed her because the story is about her. So if you're doing a story about someone, you definitely want to interview them if you can. Sometimes you can't, but you want to. Her coach is the person who gave her the position that she plays and is the reason why she still plays it. So that's valuable. Her teammates are people who play with her, so you can get insight from them about what she is like as a teammate, what she's like as a quarterback, how she plays the game. Her father is the person who introduced her to football and helped her become a football player, so then you would talk to him about that. And her family. You always want to talk to the story subject's family if you can, because no one knows you better than your family does.
So you just want to try to get information from anybody associated with them.
Yeah, the story that I told you about that was 7,000 words a little while ago. You guys are a little away from 7,000 words, but that's fine. I interviewed 150 people for that story. So that's a lot. Yeah, that's the best way to put it. It's a lot. The better you know the story, the better you can convey it to your readers. The more information you have and you understand, the better your readers will be served by it. You've got this story about hurricane season being upon you, right? If you just wrote that story because you know that hurricanes come this time of year, what are you offering to your readers? Because all of your readers know that hurricanes come this time of year, right? So what do you do instead? You go and you talk to people who are meteorologists, hurricane experts. For a hurricane, you would talk to people who have been victims of a hurricane before, if their houses have been hurt, if their family members have been hurt, if things have been damaged. That's what you really want. You want to get as much information as possible because your job is to convey that information to your readers in an interesting way.
Were there any... My name is Kevin. I'm a reporter for the opinion.
Hey, Kevin.
Were there any ethical decisions that you had to consider while working on this story? If so, can you tell us about them?
I can't think of any big ethical questions from this story, but I can tell you about another ethical questions I have for stories. Is that all right? You want to do that? Okay. So the long story that I wrote that I keep referencing to you guys was about a baseball player, a minor league baseball player, Bubba Derby, and he was in Las Vegas last year. It's actually the 1-year anniversary today of the Las Vegas shooting. Do you remember when that happened in the news at the country music concert?
Yes.
Okay. So he was there when that shooting started, and he ran for his life, and he saved a couple of strangers from gunfire, and he led them to safety. Okay? And so what do you think would be an ethical concern with writing a story about a mass shooting like that?
Respect.
Respect? What do you mean by respect?
As in, like, sometimes people get a bit, they get a bit iffy, and they think that you're trying to publicize it for profit off of something that happened, and especially people who are related to victims, they can take that as a wrong way. Like, I remember seeing a video where someone is being interviewed, I think Hurricane Harvey, and they were mad because they're trying to get the story out of them, and they're like, can't you see I'm over here, I'm cold, my kids don't have anything and stuff like that. Why are
Yeah.
you trying to put this mic in my face?
All right, so I'll tell you a couple that I faced. One was, do you name the shooter? Right? The shooter's actual name, his name is Stephen Paddock. Do you name the shooter? Because a lot of people believe, researchers believe, that publicity is what drives people to do those things, to do mass shootings, to do these horrible actions. So if you name him, are you encouraging other people to do the same thing?
No.
Another one would be talking to other people who were there that night. So interviewing for the story, I had to talk to 10 people who lived through that. Do you think it's easy for someone who's been through something very traumatic to talk about that very traumatic night? It's not. And so you have to outweigh, like, is this serving the purposes of the reader? Or am I just doing it and it's not going to help anything? Because if it's not going to help anything, if it's not going to help your story, then why would you be putting someone through a very traumatic event, again, where they have to remember it in a lot of detail? So those are some ethical dilemmas from that story.
Me and I are for the Wikipedia. Okay. So Alexander is a topic of focus. Here you determine a focus and how do you come to this focus?
How did I determine the focus of the story?
Yes.
So most of the stories that I write would be what you would call profiles. And a profile is just another name for a story about a single subject, a single person. So when I go into the story, I pretty much know that the story will be about the person that I've determined I'm going to write about. So my focus is very easy. So like this story that we keep talking about Bubba Derby, he survived that night in Las Vegas. And so the story is about him and his journey since then, in the year since then. So when you're a profile writer, the real thing that you want to focus on, in addition to who the story subject is what the big idea of the story is. So the big idea of the Bubba Derby story would be about what it means to survive and live with the memories of something that's very traumatic. How do you survive something like that? Alexandria is back now, so she's going to be embarrassed. I'm sorry, Alexandria. But the big idea behind a story of someone like Alexandria would be someone breaking through a barrier, overcoming a challenge. Almost every story you read is about, almost every movie you watch is about someone encountering a problem and through a series of actions overcoming it. That's the basic structure of every single story. Somebody has a problem, and through a series of actions they overcome that problem.
Alright, so you came just in time because this is a question directed at both of you.
Okay.
So, because you both have experience, do you have any tips on the process of writing an article and getting the information that you wish you had learned at the start, or think it is important for us to know?
Sure. I think the most beneficial thing for me, especially coming from a video standpoint where you have limited time with people, is knowing as much information up front as possible. So David is the person that I have gone to on this project that's done pre-interviews, or we've looked up information about people. So you go in knowing already who the person is and what they do and things that they've been involved in and where they come from, so that you have a baseline knowledge when you go in, and it's not just you truly asking questions that you don't know answers to. It's you asking questions and getting confirmation of what you already know, and then building upon that, because I think the answers kind of lead you in down different paths that you might not have known from just basic research.
Research, full circle.
Research, lots of
Remember,
research.
we talked about research. It's very important.
Even for video pieces, and I don't know how you do it for your story, is probably a little different. For video pieces, we tend to write, you can't really write a documentary because you're getting it as you go. But you can kind of storyboard out and kind of script out the things that you want. So it's like, ideally this piece is about family, and now this piece is about home life, and now this piece is about school, and this piece is about whatever it is. And you kind of have an outline of what you want, so you go and you kind of can fill in, and you have a structure for yourself, and you're not just going and being like, well, we'll see what happens, because that usually doesn't work out very well. Or it does, but it's a lot more work to make it a cohesive narrative at the end.
That is all accurate.
David confirms.
Not accurate.
What do I wish that I knew when I first started? All right, this is going to be some next level stuff for you guys. Are you ready?
Oh, great. Talk slow.
Who's ready? Who's ready for next level? I need all
It might be skip a level.
next level, okay? The best thing you can do. Well, look at all those pens.
They-
Right when I said the best thing you can do, look at all
Yeah.
those pens go up.
This is going in all the college essays.
The best thing that you can do in any profession, but particularly in journalism, is really try to understand yourself and your own motivations. Because the better you understand yourself, the more present you can be when you're with the person or people that you're reporting on, where you're not coming in with a lack of confidence. You're not coming in scared. You need to be fully confident in who you are. And then that confidence rubs off on the person that you're with, and that creates an environment of trust. And the more trust you build with the people that you're interviewing, the better information you get, and the better your story turns out to be. Because journalism is not just about writing or producing videos, right? Ultimately it's about getting information. And so the most important thing you need to do and learn how to do is to report. And the best way to learn how to report is to be really confident in yourself and who you are.
And I think that's even doubly true for when you throw a video in someone's face, because it's so uncomfortable. And it's, David can get more intimate with people one-on-one if they're in their house at their kitchen table and they're just talking, and maybe there's just this little recorder. When there's a sound person and a camera person, or two camera people, and they're following you around, it's really hard to get authentic experiences because it's weird. And so I think that you break that barrier faster the more you can just be two human beings talking to each other and not doing it for some other reason, if that makes sense.
I haven't read your bio, Rachel.
You haven't?
No.
I hope it's accurate.
He didn't know he had one.
That's true. Those are facts. Rachel is a creative.
Oh, it's my LinkedIn bio.
Wait.
Okay, I'm next. So this question is for Alex.
Oh!
So
The
Alex,
tables have turned, Alex.
Oh my God. We're supposed to ask her the question.
Alex, you have had the opportunity to be on both sides of the reporter's notebook. Can you talk about what you have learned from being a source that has helped you be a better reporter?
Okay. I think being able to be on like both sides really helped, because when I'm getting interviewed, then I know like what kind of responses I would want to hear to make it easier for me to like write something or whatever I'm doing. So I try to like use that knowledge, and that helps my answers, sort of. I hope so anyway. And on the flip side, it helps me as a reporter, because now I know like how uncomfortable it can be when you're being interviewed, because it's not always easy. Like, the questions may seem easy to like you when you're asking them, but when it comes time to answer it, then you're just like, do I sound weird? It's like, is that weirded, or is that worded weirdly, And sometimes it's like you're just worried about that instead of your actual answer. So I think it really helped me both ways. Like, I think I helped myself as a reporter to make sure that whoever I'm interviewing is like comfortable and stuff. And when I'm being interviewed, I just learn to just talk to them, have a normal conversation, because it's just a normal conversation when you think about it. It's just being recorded.
Okay, let's go.
ministry.
How do you tailor your work to the mission of the organization you're working for?
I think whoever you're working for, if it's a brand that's not as unbiased as like just a news source, like a big paper or something, you just have to find out what their mission statement is. I think every company kind of has a mission statement, and you just figure out who their audience is, what their audience likes, and I think that you shouldn't tailor it 100% to their audience, but kind of put it within that realm. So within Bleacher Report, Bleacher is a sports audience. Is their number one thing that they like to read about high school football? No. But do we know that they like football? Yeah. So do we get other things involved? Do we use the football, have people talk about football in terms of metaphors, or reference famous football players, or things like that that can kind of connect people and bring them back? And it's just I like to see what the main audience is and then try and get as far away from it within reason as possible to expand the content that they're looking at and seeing and hearing. So I think you look at the mission statement of the company that you're working for and see what their goals are, and you have to align to that.
So you basically want to be able to cater to their interests while being as far away from it as you can, where they'll still read it and they're not just going to brush it off and flip to nothing.
Yeah, I think cater to the interest and also expand it. You know, you want to have them learn something new. You don't want to just keep feeding them the same thing over and over and over again, right? Widen their horizons.
Are we both answering each question?
I don't know.
No, she did great.
Tell us about one of your most memorable experiences while being in Germany.
Go ahead, David.
At the Final Four 2 years ago, college basketball Final Four, it was a Saturday night of the semifinals, and two of the universities that were playing were Syracuse and Villanova. And at the game was Vice President Joe Biden, at the time. Vice President Joe Biden. And he was sitting right behind press row. There were two press rows because at big events there's a lot of reporters. So he was sitting right behind press row on the sideline, and I was sitting at press row on the baseline. And a bunch of reporters were tweeting that he was right behind them. One of my friends took a selfie with him. I was jealous. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to do one better. I'm going to get the only interview from tonight with the vice president. I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I went about doing it. So, in between the games, there's two games on Saturday night. In between the games, the vice president got up, presumably to use the restroom. I don't know. But I timed it so that I would be in the hall right by the court at the same time as him. So I walked up towards him. I was like shoulder to shoulder with him. Reached out my hand, said, Mr. Vice President, I'm David Gardner. I was with Sports Illustrated at the time, so I said, I'm from Sports Illustrated. And right as soon as he stopped talking, he just said, hi, nice to meet you. I asked my first question because you don't want, with a person like that, you waste no time. You just got to get right into it. So I asked him who he was rooting for because I might be remembering this backwards, but he went to Villanova Law School and his wife went to Syracuse, or the other way around, but they both had an alumni relationship with one of the schools. So he told me that he was rooting for his wife's school because he wanted to sleep in his bed that night, which is smart. And then I asked him if he was beating President Barack Obama in their March Madness pool. And he said that he was. And I was about to ask my third question. I had one more question that I wanted to ask him. And a Secret Service agent stepped in front of me and shouldered me right in the chest, and he said, that's far enough. And then Vice President Biden kept walking by. He turned around, he smiled, he looked at me and goes, don't worry, that happens to everybody. Nice talking to you. And then he walked off.
What was going to be?
I was going to tell him.
Oh, no.
Do you guys have other questions that you thought of during this? Because they didn't have much time to prepare because I found out about Friday, so.
No problem.
Okay, the last question is, how did you get into journalism?
Rachel's my personal hero, and I just wanted to be like her.
I got into...
She's also what,
What?
15 years older, 20 years older than me?
Yeah, I'm 75
At
years
least,
old.
at
Yeah.
least, but that makes me 55. You could have aged us both lower than that.
No. I got into, I guess this is video journalism, from a totally different route. Was working in commercials, making big commercials and doing like celebrity content stuff, and then started working for a company that did more editorial video. And so it kind of came by accident. I loved being in production. After doing commercials for a really long time, I didn't find a lot of value in doing commercials. I really like telling stories, and people tell stories. And so was drawn to these pieces that had people at the focus. And so that kind of turns into journal. I don't know if people like would look at the video stuff and consider it journalism at this point, or if it's just like online content or however people are watching it, but they're little documentaries that are now, taking over the internet. So I kind of came in from an internet content place, and really like it. It's a lot harder to do than scripted. I come from like a world where everyone has a script and you can just rehearse it and you know where you're going and you know exactly what's going to happen. And it is just as much work to set it up, but it's a lot easier because once you're there, it goes as you plan. And so when you have things up in the air and real people doing real life things, it's a lot harder. So I've learned a lot over the past few years doing more documentary style stuff.
That ties in. Did you guys see the quote that she had on one of her websites? Planning is essential. Plans mean nothing. Or something like that.
You can plan all you want. It is not going to go as you plan. But having the backwork, having the groundwork there for it is really great. And having a backup plan and then a backup plan for your backup plan seems to be the way to go.
And Hannah, I think you should, did you ask that question? You should push David. He sort of deflected.
Yeah. Who's going to push me? Push back.
He didn't answer your question,
Yeah.
did he? You said, why did you get into journalism? And he said, because of Rachel?
Which is not true.
Clearly a lie.
What's the real answer?
What's my real answer? This is your teacher's teaching you something very valuable. Just because someone says something after you ask them a question does not mean that they have answered your question.
Which
right?
you might have seen in some recent hearings.
Exactly. Yeah. If you ever watch a politician do an interview, they say things after the reporter asks questions, but very rarely is it an answer to that question. They'll say, tell me about this latest scandal, and the politician will say, well, the economy is doing great. That doesn't have anything to do with the scandal, right? So if you're not present when you're doing your interview, if you're not really paying attention, then you're going to get back and you're going to open your little recorder and you're going to realize I don't have anything worth writing about because the guy didn't answer any of my questions or the girl didn't answer any of my questions, right? I got into journalism because I liked writing poetry and I wasn't very good at that. And then I tried to write some fiction, and I wasn't very good at that either. And so I decided that I would write some nonfiction instead.
So it's the third
wheel.
option.
And it's to be determined if I'm any good at this either. So we'll have to see. What's below nonfiction? Just
Copy?
rantings.
Billboards?
Just rantings on the side of a building.
Graffiti.
Yeah, graffiti.
David,
Yes.
you worked for Sports Illustrated.
I
right?
did.
Was that one of your first jobs? That's a pretty big...
Yeah. I worked for CBS Sports. Well, after college, I traveled around the world for a year, and then I came back and I got the first job I could find at CBS because when I was traveling, I met a lovely young woman named Ash, and she lived in California, and so I decided I would move to California to be closer to her, and then we got married, so that worked out, and then we moved across the country because I got offered a job with Sports Illustrated, and that was one of my dreams growing up. I used to get Sports Illustrated in the mail every week and used to rush to my mailbox to go read it, and that was very exciting. And then Bleacher Report was just another great opportunity to do the kind of stories that I think matter.
So is that the last pre-prepared question, Hannah? Okay, so we
Another
have...
one.
Hold on, can I say one more thing? So we have about 15 minutes left in class, so we can keep asking them questions if we want, or we can stop and sort of let them continue with whatever they're doing today and digest the information. But yeah, you haven't asked me a question yet. did. What was your
She had a pre-prepared question.
What was your question?
What have you traveled to Asia?
I have been to Asia. Yeah. Unfortunately, not for a story, but I've been to Thailand, Vietnam, South Korea, Malaysia, Laos, Burma.
What's Burma?
Add that to your list of things to Google today.
There's one other one in there. Cambodia.
Oh, Cambodia.
Yeah.
Okay.
But
So
what you're doing right now is, like I said, when I read about them, I realized they would be awesome for profiles. I mean, I could just ask both of them all sorts of questions about them.
Yes.
So our goal today is to focus on journalism. So that's a very interesting question, but not within the scope of what we want to do today. Okay? Unless he would say that he did that all because of journalism. But you said no, that was outside of journalism.
I would say that traveling and understanding other cultures and going to new places, understanding things that you don't understand is the heart of what journalism is. You try to go figure things out that you don't know. And so anything that you can do to that end, including traveling, will really help you become a better journalist. I do think that my travels helped me become a better journalist because you learn to be fluent in, not in the language necessarily, but in a different place. You learn to be comfortable in places that would make you uncomfortable. You learn to expand your horizons. I think traveling is one of the most important things you can do in your whole life. But for any profession, particularly journalism, I do think it's important.
Purpose? David?
I would say the purpose is to tell stories that matter and to communicate them in such a way as that they have an impact. And the impact can be small or large. But you really want to give your readers information about something that they don't know about. And you want to teach them something. That's the point of it, to me. And for those things to be true. It's also very valuable.
And what do you call it if you write something that's not true?
Libel. You don't want to do that. That's bad.
It's not very nice.
Not very nice, yeah.
I would think the purpose of at least video journalism is showing someone something that they didn't think that they could know about someone. So you hear about Alexandria is a female quarterback of a high school football team. You're like, yeah, okay. I know girls that could probably do that I grew up with, but like, do you know what her family is like and what the town is? You like when people think of Honolulu, they think of the beach and stuff. Do they think about where this school is? There's like just showing them a supplement to what they think that they already know and they can walk away with and not have to rethink ever again. I think is a really valuable thing to do. Not necessarily proving them wrong, just adding to their knowledge of a person or a place.
Kelvin, Thompson, Alex, you guys want to ask any questions?
Yeah. Hi, my name is Thompson and I'm the editor for The Opinion.
Ooh.
And so, I myself, I'm doing a documentary and it so happens to be on Alex too. It's not for The Opinion, but it's for my film class. So, you were talking about storyboarding and like trying to plan ahead, like whatever shots you want. And so, I'm trying to do that too. And it's kind of hard because all I can think of is like maybe footage of her practices and then the games. So I wanted to have some insight on your side of like storyboarding.
Sure. You can storyboard from we call it like a radio edit. So if you had your eyes closed and you watched the documentary, it should make sense audibly what's going on, right? Usually you pull from a lot of voiceover stuff, but it's really boring to just watch someone sitting and doing an interview. It's like 60 minutes, right? You just like go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And that's why people don't like watching 60 minutes. If you fill up the B-roll, right? Do you know what B-roll is, like the extra part? If you fill it up with B-roll of that life, so it's literally, you might think it's boring to follow someone around to class, but if they're talking about what they do in school and you show them in school doing what they do, while they're telling you about what they do, it pairs it up and it's so much more interesting and you get that same. The benefit of video journalism versus regular journalism is that you get to show them instead of telling them everything. So I don't have to describe in my video what this classroom looks like and how the fan was blowing and how it was humid outside and how there's things on the walls. You get to see it, and we get to like see that people are sitting there and see that the sun is out and see that the walls are filled with paper and stuff like that. So I think the more you can, things that seem like they don't matter probably are usually the parts of documentaries that are the most interesting, to me at least. The little details of people's lives and where they are and what they were doing. So I think fill up on B-roll. That's what we've been doing while we've been here. We've been like shooting all over the place, and it'll end up being like 2 or 3 minutes of something, but it's going to be so much more interesting than, you know, hearing the coach sit and talk about how his team is doing this year.
Since our goal is to learn about journalism, that's pretty much what I'll ask you about. So when you're writing an article, you usually come up with questions beforehand to ask the person. So I was wondering how you brainstorm for those questions.
So most of the questions that you come in with are informed by the research that you do. So that's why you do a lot of the research. You want to get certain things right. The other thing is, when you're doing research, I didn't mention this earlier, but I should have, you need to read everything with, you know, like a grain of salt. Just because it's been written before doesn't mean necessarily that it's true. Other news organizations may not have the same rigorous fact-checking that you would like. It may not 100% be accurate. If you've ever been written about before, you probably realize like one thing in there was not exactly true, so you want to make sure that all of that is accurate and ask again. And then I do come in with a set of questions that I'm thinking about, but the important thing, again, during an interview is to remain really present, really focused on what the person is saying, making sure that they're answering your question, and also making sure that if they say something interesting, that you ask a follow-up question about that, because the best things that happen during a story, like Rachel talked about earlier, are when you learn something that you didn't know, right? Like you get all this background information, you confirm what you can, and then you learn something you didn't know, and then that takes you down a path, a more interesting path for the rest of the story. So if you do have a list of questions, that's great, but you don't want to just be married to that list of questions. You don't want to just go 1, 2, 3, 4 in order and not take any breaks. You need to be making sure that you're listening to the answers, and if they say something that determines that like you need a follow-up from that, then you need to follow up and ask that question. If you're writing a story about, say I'm writing a story about Rachel and I want to do a story about how you make a video, right? Video production, like how do you do video production, and I'm writing a story about her, and then I ask her a question, and then she talks about how she's jumped out of 15 airplanes in her life, right? And then I just move on after that. Then I put that quote in there, people will be like, why did she jump out of 15 airplanes? That's really weird. You need to ask, why is she an avid skydiver? What made you an avid skydiver? Does that relate to what she does in any way in video production? Does she jump out of airplanes with people for video stories? If they say something really interesting, you need to follow that path down as far as it goes, and just forget about your list of questions for a second, come back to them, but make sure that you follow the most interesting path that presents itself during an interview.
And the same thing happens when you're following someone with the camera. If they're like, hey, we're going to do this thing, and we didn't know that they were planning on doing that, it's like, yeah, if you have the time, you should go and follow and see what happens. You never know. You get little awesome sound bites from those kinds of events. Everyone's guard is kind of down because they're not expecting you to do that. You know, they're not expecting you to ask them about those follow-up questions or something.
Alex, how about you? Do you have a question today? Oh.
Alex,
she knows everything about us.
She's asked us all kinds of questions already.
Alex, is there anything that you've talked to them about that you think they should share with us?
None of our secrets, Alex.
Don't tell our secrets.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, like, I'm putting on the spot.
I don't know, like, did you guys ask, like, what your favorite part about being a journalist was?
No. My favorite part is working with Rachel.
My favorite part is working with David.
Go ahead, Rachel.
My favorite part, I kind of said it before, I like telling stories. I think that people are really interesting. I think that a lot of the tension and the conflict that happens in this world is because people don't listen to each other. And the more opportunity you have for someone to tell them your story, and if like you're lucky enough to tell it to Bleacher Report where 100,000 people are going to read it or see it, then that's a pretty lucky position to be in. And I think that if, 4 people walk away and say, I was judging this person and I don't judge them anymore, or I thought this of this person, but now they're more like me than I thought, then that's a win. And I think that that's a really awesome thing, where you could be making stories that are just tearing people down all the time, which is not going to contribute to anything.
I'm really afraid of being bored, and journalism is a great way not to be bored, because you're always learning about new, interesting things. It's always learning. That's what you're doing. All of journalism, the act of reporting, is learning about something you don't know about so you can communicate it to your raw audience. And so, I don't like being bored, and I get to go and not be bored on a regular basis.
Do you have a question?
How do you know if a topic is too controversial?
How do you know if it's too controversial?
I would say that there's no such thing as something that's too controversial.
agree.
The more controversial it is, the more interesting it is, and the more opportunity you have to humanize it. If something is really controversial, that means people have these very polarized opinions about it, right? They either think it's terrible or it's great, right? That's what a controversy is. And the truth of life is almost never that something is really, really bad or really, really good. The truth is way more complicated than that. And so a controversy allows you to come and tell a really interesting story.
Are you thinking about a particular topic when you ask that question? Are you thinking about our pitch session the other day, Kevin?
Ooh.
You were?
What was
your
it?
topic? Your topic was about immigration, and you were kind of afraid it might be too controversial? You what? You don't want to write about it. Okay. Well,
Because it's too controversial?
Who came up with the idea? But then you decided that maybe it's not.
All right, so let's just think about big picture about immigration, right? Okay, so the big controversy of immigration are politicians in Washington, D.C. want to say how many people can come into the United States and how many people can't, right? And how they should legally come in and how they should not. That's a really big question which people have polarized opinions on, right? What is immigration really about, though? It's not about laws, right? What is it really about? Who's doing the moving? People. Yeah, immigrants. Immigration is really about immigrants, right? People who are moving. So the topic of immigration may be controversial, but immigrants are just people. People like my parents are immigrants to this country, right? And so you can have a really interesting story about a controversy when you narrow it really, really far down and you just tell the story of immigrants. I'm sure at your school there are many, many people who are either immigrants or who are parents of immigrants or who are generationally, their grandparents are immigrants to this country, right? And you can tell a really human story about a really big topic by narrowing your focus.
And that's something when you're like talking about how do you pinpoint it to your audience or narrow your story for whatever it is. At Bleacher Report, if you wanted to do an immigrant story, guess what? That immigrant can be an athlete. And you frame it as a football player, but you're telling an immigrant story. But all of a sudden, someone that only watches football 7 days a week is reading a story about a football player whose family came from here, and this was the struggle, and now they're making it, and this is how they're doing, and this is how they're living their life. But you framed it as a football story. On the top, it's a football story because they play football, but that's one aspect of their life, right?
I like to watch football.
Cool.
If you're ever afraid of doing a story, you should ask yourself why. Why are you afraid of doing it?
Because it's not really that much moving to Hawaii.
Are there no immigrants in Hawaii?
There is, but like it's not.
If it's not relevant, then you shouldn't do a story, right? Because if it's not relevant, what's the point of it? But if it's a topic that's in Hawaii, just because it's controversial, if the reason you don't want to do it is because it's controversial, you should ask yourself, why do you not want to do something that's controversial?
I haven't faced backlash. I think there's always going to be like trolls and comments and stuff now that we're on the internet. You know, I did a piece for Bustle, which is like a women's website. That was all of the 5 guys from Queer Eye for the Straight Guy, the new one. They like do a makeover show, and it's 5 gay men that come in. They like redo the apartment and give this non-gay person their new clothes and stuff. And we had them tell their coming out stories for for whatever that month was, June, National Pride Month, and the things that they would say were terrible. It was like, who cares? These people are lying, blah, 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 like a lot of anti-gay slurs and stuff like that. And it's just like, you can't listen to it. I know that they don't listen to it, but it's never been anything that, someone's always going to hate what you do no matter what. Someone's going to hate the clothes that you wear. Someone's going to hate the place that you live. Like, you just go for it anyway and try and show them that they're being insensitive.
I'm going to go ahead and stop it.